The year was 1485, and the kingdom of Valeria stood at the height of its power. After decades of war and bloodshed, King Aldric IV had secured his throne, uniting the fractured territories under a single banner. A warrior, a ruler, and a man adored by his people, Aldric was not only a conqueror, but also a husband deeply in love. His queen, Isolde of Arcadia, had once been a princess of a rival kingdom, their marriage a union forged through careful diplomacy. Yet despite its political nature, their bond had blossomed into a true love that poets immortalized in song. Together they stood as the ideal royal couple, majestic, untouchable, their reign unshaken. But beneath the surface of this golden marriage, the seeds of betrayal had already taken root. Duke Lucien of Navarre had been Aldric's closest friend since childhood. Together they had ridden into battle, bled for the kingdom, and shared in its greatest victories. As Aldric's most trusted advisor, Lucien held power second only to the king himself, his influence woven into every political and military decision. Yet power, once tasted, breeds an insatiable hunger. And Lucien had long since realized that his ambitions could never be fully realized while Aldric sat upon the throne. But ambition was not his only weakness. For years he had harbored a secret desire, one far more dangerous than political aspirations. Lucien was in love with Queen Isolde. At first he had buried his feelings, content to admire her from a distance. But as the years passed, that admiration turned to obsession, an unbearable torment that gnawed at him with every glance she shared with Aldric. And so slowly, carefully, he began his treachery. The first whispers of betrayal were subtle, rumors planted in the right ears, doubts sown in the shadows of court politics. It began with minor disputes between Aldric and his nobles, small cracks in the foundation of his rule that Lucien quietly widened. The Duke knew Aldric's weaknesses well, his pride, his stubbornness, his unwavering trust in those he considered loyal. And so, when the moment was right, Lucien struck. A rebellion erupted in the eastern provinces, one that Aldric was forced to crush personally. It was Lucien who had encouraged the king to lead the army himself, to leave the capital and show his strength. What Aldric did not know was that this uprising had been carefully orchestrated, a distraction meant to draw him away. For as the king rode to war, Lucien remained behind, and Isolde, left alone in the vast halls of the palace, became the final piece in his grand design. The seduction was not immediate. Lucien was too cunning for that. At first he played the role of the grieving friend, a man who claimed to worry for the queen's safety, who confided in her his fears that Aldric's ambition would one day ruin them all. He spoke of loneliness, of devotion unrecognized, of a kingdom that could flourish under wiser rule. And Isolde, weary from years of courtly intrigue, burdened by the weight of a crown that had never truly been hers, began to listen. It started with stolen conversations in candlelit corridors, the quiet understanding of two souls trapped in a world of duty. Then the gentle touch of a hand, the lingering of a gaze too long to be innocent. And one night, when the autumn winds howled through the empty palace, the line between loyalty and treason was forever crossed. Their affair was a dangerous dance, one that neither could afford to be caught in. But passion, once ignited, is impossible to extinguish. In Aldric's absence, Lucien became more than a lover. He became a shadow king, whispering in Isolde's ear, guiding her decisions, securing his grip over the court. And then, as all betrayals must, it reached the moment of no return. News arrived that Aldric had crushed the rebellion, his victory swift and merciless. He was returning home. Lucien knew that their stolen moments were numbered, that soon Aldric would stand once more before his queen, and she, no matter her guilt, would belong to him again. That was something he could not allow. And so he made his final move. A plan so bold, so reckless, that success would crown him a king and failure would see him executed as a traitor. On the night before Aldric's return, a message was sent to the eastern provinces, to the remnants of the rebellion. Their leader, once a mere pawn, was given a new task: kill the king. It was to be an ambush, a final stroke of treachery on the road back to the capital. Lucien assured Isolde that this was the only way, that they could not live in fear of discovery, that once Aldric was gone, they would be free to rule together. But what he did not see, what he had never accounted for, was that love, no matter how fractured, does not fade so easily. That night, as Isolde lay beside him, her heart a battlefield of longing and regret, she realized the depth of the abyss she had stepped into. And for the first time since it all began, she was afraid. At dawn, she made her choice. A lone rider was sent from the palace, galloping through the mist-covered hills, desperate to reach Aldric before it was too late. The warning came just in time. As Aldric and his men approached the ambush site, the traitors were already in place, blades drawn, ready to strike. But the king was no fool. Forewarned, his forces turned the trap against the assassins, cutting them down in a swift and brutal counterattack. When the last traitor fell, Aldric turned his horse toward the capital, his mind burning with one question: who had betrayed him? He did not yet know of Lucien's hand in the plot, but he knew where the letter had come from. It had been sent from his own palace, from his own queen. The return to Valeria was not the homecoming he had envisioned. As his army rode through the city gates, there was no celebration, no cheers of victory. The people sensed the storm brewing, the shift in the air. And within the palace, behind gilded doors, the true reckoning awaited. Lucien was waiting in the throne room, dressed in his finest robes, his confidence unshaken. Even as Aldric stormed in, sword still stained with the blood of those who had sought to kill him, Lucien did not flinch. He had prepared for this moment. Lies were already spinning in his mind, excuses ready to be spoken. But then, from the shadows, Isolde stepped forward. Her eyes met Aldric's, and in that instant he knew. He had known her too long, loved her too deeply to be fooled by words. She had betrayed him, but she had also saved him. And for that, he hesitated. It was only for a heartbeat, a brief, fatal pause. Lucien, ever the predator, seized his chance. A dagger, hidden in the folds of his cloak, flashed through the air, aimed for the king's heart. But Aldric was faster. With a roar, he brought his sword down, steel meeting flesh. Lucien staggered, his mouth open in silent shock as crimson spread across his tunic. He fell to his knees, and then he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Aldric turned to Isolde, his grip on his sword tightening. She did not beg for mercy. She did not weep. She only whispered, "I never stopped loving you." But love, Aldric realized, was no longer enough. By royal decree, she was stripped of her title, exiled to the cold northern lands where no crown would ever rest upon her head again. And as Aldric ruled alone, his heart hardened by the betrayal of the two people he had once trusted most, he understood the cruelest lesson of power. There is no room for love in a world ruled by kings and traitors. Years passed, and the legend of King Aldric IV and the betrayal that nearly cost him his throne became a whispered tale in the courts of Europe. The kingdom of Valeria prospered under his rule, but the man who sat upon the throne was no longer the same. The warmth in his gaze had been replaced with cold calculation. The laughter that once filled the great halls of the palace was gone, replaced with the distant echoes of a ruler who had lost something more than trust. He had lost the ability to love. Queen Isolde's exile had been swift and without ceremony. She was taken under heavy guard to the northern fortress of Rivenholt, a desolate stronghold on the edge of civilization where the winters were long and the land barren. No courtiers, no silk gowns, no golden halls, only stone walls, an empty bed, and the knowledge that she had once been a queen and was now nothing. The people of Valeria, once charmed by her beauty and grace, quickly forgot her name, for a fallen queen was no queen at all. But the past does not disappear so easily. Though Isolde had been cast out of Aldric's world, she had not been erased. Far from the grandeur of the palace, rumors began to spread, whispers that the queen had not accepted her fate, that in the cold north she was gathering allies. Those still loyal to the house of Arcadia, men who had once sworn fealty to her father, had not forgotten her. And neither had the ones who wished to see Aldric fall. One winter's night, a rider cloaked in black arrived at Rivenholt. The guards at the gate let him through without question, for gold still worked wonders, even in exile. The visitor was a figure from Isolde's past, a nobleman who had once served as an envoy between Valeria and Arcadia. His name was Lord Cassian Rain, a man known for his cunning and his loyalty to those he deemed worthy. As he stepped into the dimly lit chamber where Isolde now lived, he removed his hood, his sharp eyes studying the fallen queen. "You look different," he remarked. Isolde, wrapped in heavy furs, gave a hollow laugh. "Exile does that to a person." Cassian stepped closer. "Aldric's rule is strong, but not unshakable. There are those who would see another on the throne, someone with the blood of Arcadia in their veins." Isolde narrowed her eyes. "And you think that should be me?" Cassian smiled. "I think Aldric's reign is built on vengeance, and vengeance is not a foundation that lasts." Isolde exhaled slowly, staring into the crackling fire. For months she had lived with nothing but regret and the weight of her choices. She had betrayed Aldric, yes, but she had also saved him. And now, as she looked upon the man who offered her a path back to power, she realized something. She no longer wished to return to what she had lost. The past had been burned away, but the future was still unwritten. She turned back to Cassian. "Aldric is not my enemy, not anymore. But if there are those who seek to destroy him, I will not let them." Cassian's expression did not change, but something flickered in his gaze. Perhaps amusement, perhaps disappointment. "Then you leave me no choice. The ones who seek to dethrone Aldric will move with or without you. But if you will not stand against him, then you are in the way." A warning or a threat, perhaps both. As Cassian left, disappearing into the night, Isolde knew she had only one choice. She would have to return to Valeria, not as a queen seeking redemption, but as a woman who would no longer be a pawn in the games of men. Meanwhile, in the heart of Valeria, Aldric stood upon the balcony of his palace, staring at the horizon. His kingdom was thriving, his rule uncontested, yet a feeling of unease lingered in his mind. He had silenced the traitors, but had he truly defeated them? A messenger arrived at dawn, delivering news that chilled him more than the coldest winter. "My king," the messenger said, kneeling before him. "The queen, she has left Rivenholt." Aldric's grip on the stone railing tightened. He should have felt nothing. She was no longer his concern. And yet the knowledge that she was out there, moving freely in the world once more, sent a ripple through his carefully crafted control. For years he had believed the betrayal was behind him, but perhaps the game was not over yet. Aldric remained motionless on the balcony, his mind turning over the implications of the news. Isolde was gone from Rivenholt. That in itself meant little. An exiled queen was no true threat, not without an army, not without power. And yet, a part of him, a part he had spent years suppressing, stirred uneasily. He had buried his past with her, convinced himself that love was an illusion, that trust was a weakness. But her absence from exile did not sit right with him. He turned to the messenger. "How?" "Unknown, your majesty," the man responded. "The guards found her chamber empty at first light. There were no signs of struggle, no forced escape. Simply gone." Aldric exhaled slowly, his mind working through the possibilities. If she had fled, she had done so with help. And if she had help, someone still saw her as a player in the grand game of power. He knew there were those in Arcadia who still whispered her name, who longed for the return of their lost princess. But would she return to reclaim a throne that had already rejected her? A knock at the chamber door interrupted his thoughts. His chief advisor, Lord Tobias Vale, stepped inside, his expression grave. "My king, there is more," Tobias said. "There have been movements in the east, small, subtle, mercenary bands disappearing from their usual haunts, nobles meeting behind closed doors, whispers of a gathering storm." Aldric narrowed his eyes. "And you believe this is connected to Isolde?" It would be foolish to dismiss the timing. Aldric turned away, staring out at the city below. The people still adored him. His kingdom was strong. But the strongest walls crumble from within, and if history had taught him anything, it was that betrayal often came from those closest to him. "Send scouts," he ordered. "I want every port watched, every road patrolled. If she sets foot in Valeria again, I will know of it before she breathes the city air." Tobias bowed. "And if she does return, Aldric's jaw tightened. Then I will deal with her myself. Far from the palace in the heart of Arcadia's countryside, Isolde rode through the dense forest, her cloak billowing behind her. Her escape had not been easy. Rivenholt had been her prison for years, and while the guards had grown complacent in their duties, slipping past them unnoticed had taken planning. But she had succeeded. She had left behind the woman who had once been queen, the woman who had played the game of power and lost. But what was she now? She did not desire the throne, nor did she wish to see Aldric fall. But she also knew that forces beyond her control were moving, men who sought to use her name as a rallying cry for their own ambitions. Cassian had made that clear. As she rode into the clearing where her small band of allies awaited her, she felt the weight of expectation in their eyes. Some saw her as a fallen queen, others as a symbol of resistance. Few, if any, knew the truth, that she no longer knew who she was meant to be. "You've done the impossible," said a voice beside her. She turned to see Lady Evelyn Greer, a noblewoman who had once served as her lady-in-waiting before the exile. Evelyn had risked much to aid in her escape, and now she was one of the few Isolde trusted. "You're free, Isolde. But what now?" Isolde dismounted, brushing the dust from her cloak. "Now?" she exhaled. "Now, I must go where I swore I never would." Evelyn frowned. "Valeria?" "Yes," Isolde said, steel creeping into her voice. "If there is a war brewing, I will not be the excuse for it. If Aldric still believes me a traitor, I will face him. But I will not let others fight battles in my name while I hide in the shadows." Evelyn hesitated. "You know what he is now. He has not forgiven you." "I do not seek forgiveness," Isolde said. "Only the truth." The journey to Valeria took weeks. Isolde traveled in secrecy, moving only under the cover of night, avoiding patrols and known roads. She knew Aldric's reach was vast, and if he discovered her before she was ready, she would not have the luxury of an explanation. She would be tried as a traitor, her life ending in a cell or beneath an executioner's blade. By the time she reached the outskirts of the capital, her heart was pounding. The city had changed in her absence. It was grander, stronger. Aldric's rule had turned it into a fortress of power. Yet, despite all its splendor, something about it felt colder. The city she had once walked freely now felt like an empire built upon unyielding stone. That night she entered the city disguised as a traveler, her hood drawn low, her mind focused on the task ahead. She had to find someone she could trust, someone who could get her close enough to Aldric without alerting his guards. But fate had other plans. As she moved through the crowded streets, she caught sight of Cassian Rain, the man who had threatened her, the man who had nearly turned her into a puppet of rebellion. He was speaking with a nobleman she did not recognize, his expression guarded, but his posture confident. She moved closer, listening. "Tonight," Cassian was saying, "he will not see it coming. The poison is already set. By dawn, Aldric will be dead." Isolde felt her blood turn to ice. For a long time she had wondered what she would do if she faced Aldric again. If she would plead her case, if she would beg for understanding. But now none of that mattered. Whatever had passed between them, love, betrayal, exile, it no longer changed the present. Aldric was in danger, and she was the only one who could stop it. Without hesitation, she turned away, disappearing into the alleyways. There was no time to question her actions, no time to hesitate. For years she had been cast as the villain in Aldric's story. Perhaps she was, but tonight she would be the one who saved him. Isolde moved swiftly through the darkened streets of Valeria, her cloak billowing behind her as she made her way toward the palace. The city was alive with the sounds of celebration. Aldric's rule had brought years of prosperity, and tonight the people reveled in their king's success. Unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows, her mind raced. Aldric was going to be assassinated. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She had spent years hating him, resenting him for his vengeance, for casting her aside. And yet, standing in that alleyway, hearing Cassian's words, she had not hesitated. Whatever Aldric had become, whatever pain existed between them, she could not let him die. Not like this. The palace gates were heavily guarded, but Isolde knew the city better than most. She slipped through the winding side streets, finding an old passage that led to the servants' entrance. It had been years since she had last walked these halls, but muscle memory guided her steps. She had been queen here once. She had lived, loved, and lost everything within these walls. She kept her hood low as she moved through the corridors, avoiding the patrols. The air was thick with the scent of burning torches and perfume, the distant sound of laughter and music drifting from the great hall. Aldric was there. He was still alive. But how long would that last? As she reached the main hallway leading to the royal chambers, a pair of guards blocked her path. She knew she had no time to waste. One of them turned, suspicion in his eyes. "Halt! Who goes there?" Isolde acted quickly. She reached for the small dagger hidden beneath her cloak, and before the guards could react, struck the first one in the throat. Blood gurgled from his mouth as he collapsed, and before the second guard could draw his sword, she slammed the hilt of her dagger into his temple, knocking him unconscious. She exhaled, steadying herself. There was no turning back now. She pushed open the doors to the royal chambers, stepping inside. And there he was. Aldric stood near the balcony, gazing out over the city, a goblet of wine in his hand. The years had changed him. His face was sharper, his presence more commanding. There was no trace of the warmth she had once known. He turned at the sound of the door closing behind her. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then his voice came, low and dangerous. "You should not be here." Isolde pulled back her hood, meeting his gaze. "You're going to be killed tonight." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Then he exhaled, setting down his goblet. "And you've come to warn me? Why?" "Because I know who's behind it," she said. "Cassian Rainey. He's already put the poison in your cup. You have no time, Aldric." Aldric glanced at the goblet beside him, but did not touch it. "And why should I believe you? Last time we stood in this room, you betrayed me. Do you think I have forgotten?" Isolde clenched her fists. "I do not expect forgiveness, but I will not let you die for another man's ambition." Aldric studied her for a long moment, as if searching for the truth in her words. Then with a slow nod, he walked past her, pushing open the door. The guards outside turned in surprise, but with one simple order, Aldric commanded their attention. "Find Cassian Rain. Bring him to me, alive." The guards scattered, and Isolde let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Aldric turned back to her. "You will stay here. We are not finished." Minutes passed, then an hour. The sounds of shouting filled the halls as the palace erupted into chaos. Finally, the doors were thrown open, and two guards dragged Cassian inside, bruised and bloodied. He did not struggle, but his eyes burned with defiance. Aldric stepped forward, his voice like steel. "You would have killed me in my own home, poisoned me like a coward." Cassian spat blood onto the floor. "Your rule has gone on long enough." Aldric's jaw tightened. "Then you will not live to see another sunrise." He turned to Isolde, his expression unreadable. "And what should I do with you?" She held his gaze, unflinching. "That is your choice." The weight of the past hung between them. There was no love left, no trust. But in that moment, something else existed, understanding. Aldric looked at her for a long time before nodding. "You saved my life tonight. That does not erase what came before, but it matters." He stepped closer. "Leave Valeria, do not return. This is the last mercy I will give you." She nodded. There was nothing left for her here. That night, as the city slept, Isolde slipped away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving behind the palace, the crown, and the man she had once loved. Aldric watched from his balcony as she vanished into the night. For the first time in years, he felt something stir in his chest. But it was not love. It was regret.